welcome. Be sure to like and subscribe for more scary stories. Or I will come for you. If anyone would like early access to my latest stories and an ad-free listening experience, consider becoming one of the Curator's disciples. The link is in the description below. Today's story, Cipher's Code, by the Curator. Alright, so I don't even know where to start with this. I guess I should probably tell you who I am, or, well, who I was. I used to go by Cipher on some darknet forums. Don't bother looking for me now. I'm not there anymore. Trust me, you don't want to be there. Back then, I wasn't some cyberpunk hero or whatever. I was just a guy with too much time on his hands, too many bad decisions in his past, and a weird talent for digging into places I probably shouldn't have. My life wasn't glamorous. Just me. A beat-up laptop and a dingy one-bedroom apartment that smelled like mold, no matter how many air fresheners I bought. I used to spend my nights on forums, where people talked about stuff that would make your skin crawl. Hired hits, black market organs, stolen identities. But it wasn't all bad. There were these small pockets of people who weren't completely insane, like this guy, Bite Breather. He wasn't like the others. He was smart, careful, but he had this way of making you feel like you could trust him, which was rare in a place like that. We didn't talk much outside the usual forum banter, but he once helped me out of a tight spot when I accidentally pissed off the wrong people. He sent me some code to wipe my tracks. Saved my ass, honestly. I never forgot that. So when I saw his final post, it hit me harder than I expected. It was short, just a few lines, but it stuck with me. If you're reading this, I'm probably dead. I found something. Something big. It's called the list. If you're brave or stupid enough, you'll know what to do. Follow the coordinates. At first, I thought it was some kind of joke or maybe bait to lure people in. But then the news broke. Bite Breather was dead. They found his body in a burned-out car on the side of some highway in Nevada. No one knew his real name or who he was, but the way he died, it wasn't random. It was a message. I should have just let it go. I told myself that 100 times, but something about that post wouldn't let me. Maybe it was guilt for not staying in touch with him. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe I was just an idiot who didn't know when to quit. The coordinates he left led me to a park on the outskirts of town. I waited until after midnight to go. I didn't want to risk being seen. I brought my backpack, a flashlight, and a cheap burner phone. It was cold that night, and the wind kept cutting through my jacket. When I got to the spot, I started digging. I don't know what I was expecting, maybe a box or some kind of container, but all I found was a beat-up laptop wrapped in plastic. I wiped the dirt off and opened it. The screen was cracked, but it powered on. The only thing on it was a folder named Open, If You Dare. It felt like something out of a bad movie, but I couldn't help myself. I took the laptop home, connected it to a network I set up just for this kind of thing, and started poking around. That's when I realized Bite Breather wasn't kidding. The folder was locked down tighter than anything I'd ever seen. Encrypted, hidden behind layers of passwords and fake files. It took me hours just to get past the first layer, and when I did, I found something that made my stomach drop. A document titled The List. I couldn't open it yet, but just seeing the name gave me chills. I knew I was in over my head, but at that point, it was too late to back out. That's when the weird stuff started happening. My laptop, which I thought was secure, started acting up, random pop-ups, files disappearing and reappearing. Then there were the pings, untraceable signals that felt like someone was knocking on my digital door, trying to get in. And then there was the drone. I didn't notice it at first. I mean, who looks up at 3 a.m. when they're trying to crack into the biggest mystery of their life? But then I heard this faint buzzing, like a mosquito that just wouldn't quit. I glanced out my window, and there it was, a small black drone hovering just outside. I panicked. I grabbed my laptop, shoved it in my bag, and bolted. I didn't even bother locking the door. When I ran out of my apartment that night, I wasn't thinking straight. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was trying to claw its way out of my chest. I lived in one of those crummy buildings where half the lights in the hallway don't work, so everything was dark except for the faint glow of the emergency exit sign at the end. I could still hear the drone outside, its buzzing getting louder, like it was closing in. I sprinted down the hallway, clutching my backpack like my life depended on it. My shoes squeaked against the dirty tile floor, and every sound seemed amplified in the silence. When I hit the stairwell, I didn't bother taking my time. I skipped steps, nearly tripping a couple of times, but I didn't stop. The back door to the building led to an alley that always smelled like garbage and stale beer. The air outside was cold, biting at my face as I burst through the door. For a second, I thought maybe I'd lost the drone. But then I heard it again, closer this time. I looked up and saw it hovering above the alley, its little red light blinking like it was mocking me. I had to think fast. I ducked behind a dumpster, pulling my hood up to hide my face. My mind was racing. Who the hell sent that thing? Was it the people who killed Bite Breather? How did they find me so quickly? I wasn't some amateur. I knew how to cover my tracks. But clearly, someone was better. From behind the dumpster, I watched the drone hover for a few more seconds before it zipped off, heading toward the main street. I waited until I couldn't hear it anymore before I made my move. I stuck to the shadows, keeping my head down as I made my way to the nearest bus stop. By the time I got there, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely pull out my phone. I needed to get out of the city, fast. There was a 24-hour bus terminal a few miles away, and I figured that was my best bet. No cameras, no paper trail. Just cash for a ticket to anywhere but here. The bus stop was deserted. Just me and a flickering street lamp that cast long, jittery shadows across the cracked pavement. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting someone or something to appear out of the darkness. When the bus finally pulled up, I practically jumped on board, throwing a crumpled bill at the driver without even looking at him. I sat in the back, clutching my backpack like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. The laptop inside felt heavier now, like it was dragging me down. I stared out the window as the city lights blurred into streaks of yellow and orange, my mind replaying everything that had happened in the past few hours. It wasn't until I was miles away, in a dingy motel room on the outskirts of a town whose name I didn't bother to remember, that I finally had the chance to open the laptop again. The room smelled like mildew, and the walls were paper thin. I could hear the guy in the next room snoring like a chainsaw. But it was quiet enough, and for now, I felt safe. I pulled the laptop out of my bag, its scratched and dented casing looking more sinister than it had before. The screen flickered to life, and that same folder stared back at me. Open if you dare. I dared. The encryption was maddening. Every layer I cracked seemed to lead to another, each one more complicated than the last. Bite Breather had hidden this thing well, but he hadn't made it impossible. With each decrypted file, more information started to come through. Emails, photographs, videos. The first few files were bad enough. Evidence of corporate espionage, secret deals between politicians and criminal organizations. But the deeper I dug, the darker it got. I found documents detailing human trafficking rings, child exploitation, and even state-sanctioned assassinations. And then I found the names. The list wasn't just some random collection of files. It was exactly what Bitebreather had said it was. A list of some of the most powerful and dangerous people in the world, along with detailed records of their crimes. CEOs, senators, judges, police chiefs. They were all there. Some of the names I even recognized from the news. I felt sick. My hands were clammy, and my stomach churned as I scrolled through the names and their associated crimes. These weren't just bad people, they were monsters. And someone had killed Bitebreather to keep this hidden. That's when the motel room phone rang. I froze. Nobody knew I was here. Hell, I didn't even know where I was until I saw the motel sign. The phone rang again, its shrill tone cutting through the silence like a knife. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something told me that wasn't an option. With a trembling hand, I picked up the receiver. "You've gone too far, Cipher," a distorted voice said. It sounded mechanical, like it was being run through a voice changer. "Leave the laptop and walk away, or you'll end up like Bitebreather." The line went dead before I could respond. My heart was racing again, and my mind was spinning. They knew where I was. They'd found me. I shoved the laptop back into my bag and grabbed whatever I could carry. I didn't care about the money I'd spent on the room or the half-eaten sandwich sitting on the nightstand. I just needed to get out. As I stepped outside, the cold night air hit me like a slap to the face. The parking lot was empty, except for a few cars. Their windows fogged up from the chill. I didn't see anyone, but that didn't mean I wasn't being watched. I tightened my grip on the backpack and started walking, trying to blend into the shadows. Every step felt heavier than the last, the weight of the laptop pressing down on me like a curse. And then I heard it again, the faint buzzing of a drone. The buzzing grew louder as I ducked behind a row of parked cars. My breath was coming out in short, shaky gasps that fogged up the cold air. The motel's neon sign blinked behind me, casting eerie flashes of red and blue against the asphalt. I scanned the sky, trying to spot the drone, but it was nowhere in sight. That only made it worse. I needed to disappear, and fast. I knew they were closing in on me, whoever they were. My mind raced through my options. I couldn't run forever. The laptop was too dangerous to abandon, but keeping it felt like signing my own death warrant. That's when I remembered Peter. Peter wasn't exactly a friend, but we'd crossed paths a few times on forums for whistleblowers and investigative journalists. He wasn't a hacker like me. He was a reporter, one of the last few who actually cared about exposing the truth. I'd helped him out once, feeding him some encrypted data that had led to a minor scandal involving a local politician. He'd been grateful, but we hadn't spoken since. I pulled out my burner phone and typed out a quick message to the encrypted contact I had for him. "Need your help. It's big. Meet me at the old train yard, 2 miles west of town. Midnight. Come alone." I hit send and started moving, sticking to the back streets and alleyways to avoid the main roads. The train yard was abandoned, a relic of a time when this town had been more than just a forgotten blip on the map. It was the kind of place people avoided, rusted tracks, graffiti-covered walls, and a silence that felt oppressive. When I got there, the place was empty, just like I'd hoped. I found an old shipping container with its door hanging open and slipped inside. The air smelled like rust and oil, and the only light came from a crack in the ceiling where the moonlight seeped through. I sat on the cold metal floor, clutching the laptop like it was some kind of twisted lifeline. The minutes crawled by, each one stretching into an eternity. I kept checking my phone, half expecting a message from Peter telling me he wasn't coming. But then I heard footsteps. I tensed, reaching for the small folding knife I always kept in my pocket. The footsteps grew louder, crunching against the gravel outside. Then a voice called out, low and cautious. "Cipher, that you?" It was Peter. I let out a shaky breath and stepped out of the container. He was standing a few feet away, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jacket. He looked exactly like I remembered, tall, thin, with glasses that always seemed a little crooked. But there was something different about him now, something wary. "Thanks for coming," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Peter frowned, looking around like he expected someone to jump out of the shadows. "What the hell's going on?" "Your message was cryptic as hell." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I opened my bag and pulled out the laptop. The look on his face when I handed it to him told me everything I needed to know. He understood this was serious. "This belonged to a guy named Bite Breather," I said. "He's dead now, murdered, and I think it's because of what's on here." Peter opened the laptop, his brow furrowing as the cracked screen flickered to life. "What am I looking at?" I hesitated. "A list. Names, crimes, evidence. It's the kind of stuff that could ruin lives, end careers, maybe even bring down governments." Peter's eyes widened as he scrolled through the files I'd decrypted. "Jesus Christ, Cipher. This is huge." "Yeah," I said, my voice flat. "And it's also a death sentence. They killed Bite Breather for it, and now they're after me. I can't do this alone, Peter. I need your help." For a moment, Peter didn't say anything. He just stared at the screen, his face pale. Then he closed the laptop and looked at me, his expression grim. "All right," he said. "But if we're going to do this, we need a plan, and we need to move fast." Peter and I didn't get far before everything went to hell. We decided to head for a safe house he knew about, a rundown cabin in the woods about 30 miles out of town. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than staying in one place. We piled into his car, an old sedan that rattled like it was held together with duct tape and prayers, and hit the road. The drive was tense. Peter kept glancing in the rearview mirror, and I couldn't stop looking out the window, expecting to see headlights or a drone at any moment. The road wound through dark, empty countryside, the trees on either side casting long, twisted shadows. We were about halfway there when it happened. Out of nowhere, a black SUV appeared behind us, its headlights cutting through the darkness like knives. It was gaining on us fast. "Shit," Peter muttered, gripping the wheel tighter. "I think we've got company." "Lose them," I shouted, clutching the laptop to my chest. Peter slammed on the gas, but the SUV was faster. It swerved closer, its grille almost kissing our bumper. And then came the first shot. The sound of gunfire shattered the night, the bullet punching through the back window and sending shards of glass raining down on us. Peter cursed, jerking the wheel to the side as the car skidded onto a dirt road. "Hold on," he yelled. The car bounced and jolted as we tore down the uneven path, the SUV still on our tail. Another shot rang out, this one taking out the side mirror. My heart was racing, my hands trembling as I clutched the laptop like it was the only thing keeping me alive. Up ahead, I saw a fallen tree blocking the road. "Peter!" I shouted, pointing. "I see it," he yelled back. He yanked the wheel hard, sending the car veering off the road and into the woods. The tires screamed in protest, the branches scraping against the sides like claws. The SUV tried to follow, but it got stuck in the thick underbrush. For a moment, everything was silent, except for the sound of our labored breathing. "You okay?" Peter asked, glancing over at me. "Yeah," I said, though my voice was shaking. "For now." But I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The car finally sputtered to a stop on the edge of a clearing. The forest around us was pitch black, the tall pines swaying slightly in the wind. Peter killed the engine, and for a moment, the only sounds were the ticking of the overheated engine and the distant chirp of crickets. "This is as far as we're going." I climbed out of the car, my legs shaky beneath me. My whole body felt like it was vibrating from the adrenaline, and every snap of a twig in the darkness made my heart leap. The laptop felt heavier than ever in my bag, like it was trying to drag me down into the dirt. Peter grabbed a flashlight from the trunk and motioned for me to follow him. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating a narrow path that wound through the trees. "The cabin's about half a mile in," Peter said. "It's not much, but it's off the grid. No power, no running water. They shouldn't be able to track us here." I nodded, too tired and too scared to argue. We moved quickly but carefully, our footsteps crunching against the dried leaves and pine needles. The trees pressed in around us, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. When we finally reached the cabin, it was worse than I'd expected. The place looked like it had been abandoned for years. The roof sagged in the middle, and the windows were covered with grime and spiderwebs. The wooden steps creaked ominously as we climbed onto the porch. Peter pushed the door open, and it groaned on its rusted hinges. Inside, the air was stale, and the only furniture was a rickety table and a couple of mismatched chairs. A fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth filled with ash and charred wood. "It's not the Ritz, but it'll do," Peter said, setting the flashlight on the table. I dropped my bag onto the floor and slumped into one of the chairs. My whole body ached, and my mind was spinning with everything that had happened. "What now?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Peter pulled a bottle of water from his jacket and handed it to me. "Now, we figure out our next move. We can't stay here long. They'll be looking for us, and it's only a matter of time before they figure out where we've gone." I took a long sip of water, the cool liquid soothing my dry throat. "What about the laptop?" "We're so close to unlocking the rest of the files." Peter nodded, his expression serious. "Let me take a look at it. I've got some contacts who might be able to help us. If we can get the full list decrypted, we'll have everything we need to expose these people." I hesitated, my fingers tightening around the strap of my bag. The thought of handing the laptop over to anyone, even Peter, made my stomach churn. But didn't have a choice. I couldn't do this alone. Reluctantly, I pulled the laptop out and handed it to him. "Be careful with it," I said. Peter sat down at the table and opened the laptop, the screen casting an eerie glow across his face. "Let's see what we're dealing with." For the next few hours, we worked in silence. The only sounds the soft clicking of keys and the occasional crackle of the fire Peter had managed to light. I kept glancing at the windows, half expecting to see the glow of headlights or the red light of a drone. Peter was good, I'd give him that. He wasn't a hacker, but he knew his way around encrypted files. Together, we managed to unlock another layer of the laptop's security, and what we found was worse than anything I'd imagined. The files weren't just a list of names. They were detailed dossiers on every person involved, complete with photos, videos, and transcripts. There were recordings of secret meetings, photos of people exchanging briefcases full of cash, and even surveillance footage of murders. One video showed a man in a suit, someone I recognized from the news, meeting with a group of men in a dark alley. They handed him a folder, and moments later, he walked away while the men dragged a struggling woman into a van. I had to look away, bile rising in my throat. "This is insane," Peter said, his voice barely above a whisper. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "If we release this, it could blow the lid off everything. But it could also get us killed." "People need to know," I said, though my voice was shaking. "They deserve to know the truth." Peter didn't respond right away. He just stared at the screen, his face pale. "We need to be smart about this. If we just dump everything online, it'll get buried or dismissed as fake. We need to go through the right channels, make sure it gets into the hands of people who can actually do something about it. And how do we do that without getting ourselves killed?" I asked. Peter didn't have an answer. By the time the sun started to rise, we were both exhausted. Peter had fallen asleep in his chair, his head resting on his folded arms. I stayed awake, watching the fire die down and listening to the sounds of the forest. Something didn't feel right. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was a tension in the air, like the quiet before a storm. My instincts were screaming at me to run, but I didn't know where to go. That's when I noticed Peter's phone. It was sitting on the edge of the table, the screen lighting up every few seconds with a new notification. I leaned over to look, and my blood ran cold. The messages were from an unknown number. "We know you have the laptop. Deliver it to us, and you'll be rewarded. Fail to comply, and you'll both die." I stared at the messages, my heart pounding. Peter had been in contact with them. He'd known they were after us, and he hadn't said a word. I grabbed the laptop and my bag, my hands shaking. Peter stirred, opening his eyes to see me standing there, my face pale with anger and fear. "What are you doing?" he asked, sitting up. "You sold me out," I said, my voice trembling. "You've been talking to them this whole time." Peter's face twisted into something between guilt and defiance. "It's not what you think. I'm trying to negotiate, trying to keep us alive. You were going to hand me over," I spat. "Just like they wanted." Peter stood, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Cipher, listen to me. This isn't about betrayal. It's about survival. If we give them the laptop, we can walk away from this. We don't have to die for this." But I couldn't trust him anymore. I couldn't breathe. The air in the cabin felt thick and oppressive, like the walls were closing in around me. My chest ached, and my head spun. Betrayal wasn't something I'd expected, not from Peter. I'd trusted him, damn it. I'd trusted him more than anyone. And now, here he was, trying to justify selling me out to the very people who wanted to end my life. I backed away from him, clutching the laptop and bag like they were the last things keeping me grounded. My mind raced, each thought colliding into the next, like a storm. If I stayed, Peter would give me up. If I ran, they'd hunt me down. But I didn't have time to overthink this. I couldn't afford to. "You're making a mistake, Cipher." Peter's voice was softer now, almost pleading. "We can't win this. You know that. Just hand over the laptop, and this will all go away." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Instead, I turned and bolted toward the door, my heart thundering in my chest. "Cipher, wait," Peter called after me, but I didn't stop. I ran. My feet slapped against the wooden floor as I dashed through the cabin, pushing open the creaky front door and sprinting into the dense forest. Behind me, I could hear Peter calling out my name, but it didn't matter. I had to keep moving. Branches scratched at my skin as I ran through the woods, every step a desperate attempt to put more distance between me and Peter. The cold, damp air stung my lungs, and the ground beneath my feet was uneven, but I couldn't slow down. Not with the laptop, the list in my hands. I didn't know where I was going, didn't have a plan. I just knew I had to keep moving. Hours passed. By the time I reached the clearing, the sun had dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows over the tree line. My legs were sore, my muscles aching from the run, but I forced myself onward. There was no turning back now. The forest had grown eerily silent. The wind had died down, and the only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath my boots. Then, through the trees, I saw it. A black SUV parked at the edge of the clearing, its headlights casting an ominous glow over the ground. I froze. They found me. I didn't know how they'd track me down, but I wasn't surprised. The people I was up against had resources I couldn't even begin to fathom. My pulse quickened, and I could feel the weight of the laptop pulling me down, its very presence a target on my back. A figure stepped out of the SUV. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, his face obscured by the shadows. I couldn't make out his features, but the cold, calculating way he moved sent a chill down my spine. "Cipher," the man called, his voice low and menacing. "I think you've made a mistake." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. The words were stuck in my throat. I just stood there, frozen, watching as two more figures emerged from the trees behind the SUV. They were armed, their faces hidden beneath dark hoods. The firelight from the clearing flickered across their masks, casting them in a ghostly light. I swallowed, my mind racing. There was no way out. They had me cornered. I could try to fight, but I knew it would be pointless. I wasn't prepared for this. Not like they were. The man from the SUV stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he assessed me. "Give me the laptop," he said, his tone calm, almost friendly. "You don't want to make this harder than it needs to be." I tightened my grip on the laptop, my knuckles white. "I'll never give it to you," I spat, my voice shaking with fear and defiance. "You're never getting it." The man chuckled, a cold, humorless sound that sent a shiver down my spine. He raised his hand, signaling to the others. "Fine, but you're not going to walk away from this, Cipher. Not alive." Suddenly, one of the masked figures lunged at me, a swift movement that left no room to react. I ducked, narrowly avoiding his grasp, and scrambled backward, my heart pounding in my ears. The man who had spoken to me took a step forward, reaching into his jacket. I didn't wait to see what he was going for. I turned and ran, as fast as my legs would carry me. The forest blurred around me, the sounds of pursuit following closely behind. The figures didn't shout. They didn't need to. They were professionals. I zigzagged through the trees, using every trick I'd learned over the years to throw off pursuers. I hacked surveillance systems, avoided the eyes of drones. But this was different. I was outmatched, outgunned, and out of time. Then I heard it, the hum of a drone growing louder. The unmistakable sound of a mechanical death sentence. I glanced up, my breath catching in my throat. The drone hovered high above me, its red lights flashing ominously. It began to descend. Shit! I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning with each step. The drone was getting closer, its spotlight now fixed on me. I had seconds, maybe less. I couldn't outrun it, but I couldn't stop either. Then I spotted it, a narrow ravine, cutting through the trees like a scar in the earth. Without thinking, I jumped, landing on the other side with a sickening thud. The pain in my knees shot up my legs, but I didn't slow down. The drone's spotlight flickered, and for a moment, I thought I'd lost it. But then I heard the low hum of the engines, and it was right behind me again. I pushed through the pain, sprinting through the underbrush, my footfalls heavy against the damp earth. But there was nowhere left to go. I was running out of time. I couldn't keep running. I had to make my stand. I turned to face the drone, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could hear the footsteps of the men behind me, close now, maybe just a few yards away. I had one shot, one chance to survive this. The laptop, the list. I knew what I had to do. I didn't hesitate. I opened the laptop, my fingers shaking as I unlocked it one final time. The list, the names, the crimes, everything flashed on the screen in front of me. One last gamble. With a steadying breath, I pressed the button to upload the entire file to a secure, anonymous server I'd set up long ago. The screen flickered, and I felt the weight of the moment settle over me. It was done. The drone hovered above, its spotlight blinding now, and the figures behind me were closing in, but I didn't care anymore. I had exposed them. All of them. There was no going back. No hiding. The truth would spread, no matter what happened to me. I turned to face them one last time, a mixture of defiance and resignation in my eyes. They didn't hesitate. They didn't need to. Bang. This is the Curator. I hope you've enjoyed today's scary stories. Until next time.